On Wednesday, a French consular official was allowed to go to Tehran's notorious Evin prison to visit detained French citizens Jacques Paris and Cecile Kohler. Some hoped it was a good sign that they may be released after more than 3 years in jail. But now they've been charged for spying, including charges of spying for Israel, which carries a death penalty. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Till Tuesday, their families didn't know if they were still alive, following the Israeli airstrikes last week at Evin prison, where they were being held. Then on Wednesday, diplomatic sources said Iran had charged French nationals Cecile Kohler and her partner Jacques Paris with spying for Israel's intelligence agency Mossad. They also accused them of plotting to overthrow the regime and corruption on earth. All three charges carry the death penalty.
They're terrified because not only are they still in shock over the bombings that they lived through that happened just meters from them, now they're caught between these two dangers, that they could be bombed again if the war restarts, and the perspective of the death penalty hanging over them.
Kohler and Paris have been detained in Iran since they were arrested during a tourist trip there in 2022. Since then, they've endured conditions that France says amount to torture. Tehran has yet to confirm the charges against them, but the French foreign minister said Thursday that they would be completely unjustified and unfounded, as he raised the threat of sanctions on the Iranian regime.
We have always made this clear to our contacts within the Iranian regime. Any decisions on sanctions will be conditional on resolving this major issue and securing the release of Cecile Kohler and Jacques Paris.
Iran's Revolutionary Guards have detained dozens of foreign and dual nationals in recent years, often on espionage-related charges. Western countries accuse Tehran of using them as bargaining chips.
For more, let's go to London. Tara Kangarlou is a journalist, author of The Heartbeat of Iran, and adjunct professor at Georgetown University in Washington. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
So we were concerned in France over the fate of Cecile Kohler and Jacques Paris after that Israeli bombing of that partially damaged Evin prison during their 12-day war. We get news of them, which is a sigh of relief. And then the next day, these charges that carry a death penalty. How do you make sense of this?
Yes, an important story indeed. And if I may just add that over 70 people were killed in that attack that was called a symbolic attack but by Israel. And so many of those killed were just ordinary civilians. I actually read an interesting story recently of this young mother who was there putting bail for so many, again, charged for petty reasons, and she was trying to put a bail for them. And so many stories we're hearing, and of course the dual citizens and dual nationals who for long have been used by bargaining chips by the Islamic regime to pressure Europeans and Americans. And unfortunately, the story and the plight of these two French citizens are not unique and are not unprecedented. We have seen this before on many occasions. And, again, with regards to French nationals, back in 2022, I believe, or 2020 rather, Benjamin Brière, and who was a tourist, and Bernard Felland, he was an author and academic, they were arrested and they were released, years later in 2023. So this has been a long strategy of the Islamic regime to arrest dual nationals as a bargaining tool to get what it wants. And the question is, what is it that they want right now?
Could we point, for instance, to the phone call that the French president had on Wednesday with his Russian counterpart? A lot of the discussion was about Iran and the Middle East. Is that what this is about? Because it's not just the fact that they're being held, it's why they're being charged so severely at this particular moment.
Exactly. And that's the entire point. Right now, there is a lot of pressure on the three European signatories of the JCPOA, of the nuclear deal, that being France, Germany, and England, to essentially trigger the snapback mechanism and restate all the UN sanctions that are in ways the harshest of sanctions, right? And France is put in the middle. And I think what Iran and the Iranian regime is doing is trying to put pressure on their French counterpart to perhaps influence England and Germany to not reinforce this the snapback mechanism. So I think this really fundamentally comes down to that. I will say, though, the last 12, or rather the 12 days of war between Israel and Iran really ignited this purge on behalf of the Iranian regime to go against anyone and everyone they deem to be spies, right? And as often that we've seen, they're going after the most vulnerable and really those who are very unlikely to be part of any of such activities, and that includes thousands and thousands of Afghan refugees who are actually, as we speak, being deported back to Afghanistan. And I think it's quite important to bring attention and awareness to that at the time that, again, we are hearing of the verdict against these two French nationals.
So there's the perceived threats on home soil for the regime, and then there's abroad. If you go to the history books, the list is long of Iranians killed in Paris, in Vienna, in Stockholm, in lots of places here in Europe. Right now, what's the capacity for the Iranian regime to go after perceived enemies after this 12-day war?
Excellent point. And when you talk to Iranians in Iran, and I've been speaking to some folks actually today after this news, most of them say, the real spies, and by the way, there is no reason to believe that Israel does not have the most profound intelligence, within the various factions of the Iranian regime and government. And when you hear people, they say, listen, the Israeli intelligence has infiltrated in the highest levels of the regime and the government. And, instead of the regime to be alert and aware of that and go after the real threat, they are going again after the most vulnerable and the most innocent. And you mentioned the Iranians abroad. So in so many cases, the dual nationals that have been arrested were used again as a tool, as a human tool, to have the Iranian regime detainees abroad released. And again, another case of that is actually a friend of mine, Olivier van de Castel, so a Belgian citizen who was arrested for no reason. He was a humanitarian, an aid worker, and after many years, he was released in exchange for the Belgian government to release an Iranian convicted terrorist. So again, it goes back to how the Islamic regime, for over the many years that we've seen, uses people, ordinary citizens and civilians as a bargaining tool for their own interest.
U.S. State Department on Wednesday reiterating their advice to their compatriots not to go to Iran on vacation. There are still people who would like to go to Iran on vacation.
I mean, quite frankly, I'm not sure if an ordinary American would want to go to Iran on holiday. However, there are many dual nationals, dual Iranian Americans, British Iranians, French Iranians, and we have to understand that the tensions between the Islamic regime of Iran and the West, that be of Europe or the United States, affects ordinary lives, affects ordinary people. You have families that are torn apart because of these threats, because of these arbitrary behaviors that really have no rhyme and reason except, again, preserving the interest of the regime. And it's affecting ordinary civilians, ordinary people. There are students, business people, folks who are active in the arts, culture, music. They can't go back to Iran because they're afraid, simply because they hold another passport. And that has long affected families, livelihoods, and it's, again, to the detriment of exchange between a vibrant society that is, 90 million Iranian people and a huge diaspora, and also citizens of European countries and the United States who want to go to Iran and engage with the people of Iran, but again are being held back by these, backward and brutal policies and behavior of these Islamic regimes. So, as always, as usual, it's the ordinary citizens who are ultimately being affected.
And we have breaking news on this. France's president says he's going to call his Iranian counterpart and does not rule out retaliatory measures. Tara Kangarlou, many thanks for joining us from London.
Thank you.